How to meatloaf. Making the best meatloaf ever. You're 10 ingredients away from making the best meatloaf ever. This is a classic recipe that is easy to make. If you're hesitant, don't worry. I'll walk you through some common problems people face when trying to make meatloaf and guide you through it. Call to action to write something in the comments. Example in the comment section, if you agree or disagree. Before we get started, let's gather up our ingredients. 10 simple pantry staples are all it takes to make this divine meatloaf recipe. Olive oil. This is used to sauté the onions. Yellow onion. If you want a stronger onion taste, try using white onions instead of yellow. Ground beef. I used 90/10 here. Different fat contents cook differently, so choose wisely. More information is down below on that. Breadcrumbs. Plain breadcrumbs. You can also use Italian breadcrumbs here if you don't have plain on hand. Eggs. This is used for binding all the ingredients together. Milk. To keep the meatloaf moist. Salt and pepper. Season to taste. Ketchup. For flavor and moisture. Worcestershire sauce. More flavor and moisture. Parsley. To garnish. I want to show you guys some secret tips and tricks for your meatloaf to make it the best meatloaf you ever had. There's already enough ingredients that bring moisture to this meatloaf recipe, so getting beef with a higher fat content is unnecessary. Stick to a 90/10 or leaner. Falling apart. To keep your meatloaf from falling apart, make sure you measure everything correctly. All of these binding ingredients like breadcrumbs are super important. Or you sliced into it while it was still piping hot. Let it rest for 10 minutes before cutting. Overbaking. This can lead to a dry meatloaf. Use a meat thermometer to help determine when it's done. More on that below. The best temperature for meatloaf is the general rule of thumb here is to cook a meatloaf 30 minutes per pound of beef. This is at the oven temperature of 350 degrees. Cooking times will vary because no two ovens are alike. Plus, the thinner and flatter you make your loaf, the quicker it will cook. I baked mine for about an hour. You may need more time. To check when your meatloaf is done, stick it with a meat thermometer. If it reads 160 degrees or more, you're good to go. Overbaking can dry out your meatloaf though, so watch it. Enough talking about the meatloaf. Let's make some of the best meatloaf you ever had. First step, wash your hands. Make sure to preheat oven to 350 degrees. Bring out a large pan and then line half-sheet pan with heavy-duty foil. Make sure to spray it lightly and evenly with non-stick cooking spray and set aside until needed. Second step, you will need a large skillet. Olive oil, onions. In a large skillet, sauté onions in olive oil until tender and browned. About 10 minutes. Pour into a large bowl. Third step, to the onions, add in ground beef, breadcrumbs, eggs, milk, salt, pepper, 1 cup ketchup, and Worcestershire sauce. Mix well until completely combined. Step 4. Form into a long log on the prepared baking sheet and flatten the top. Spread with remaining ketchup. Step 5. Bake 45 minutes to 1 hour or until cooked thoroughly. Top with chopped parsley and serve. Cover meatloaf leftovers with plastic wrap and store in the fridge for up to 4 days. Make ahead. Besides measuring ingredients and mixing them together, the only other thing you have to do is saute onions. This is why this meatloaf recipe is such an easy one. It is perfect for any night of the week and can even be made ahead of time. Simply mix the meat mixture together in a bowl and cover with plastic wrap. Refrigerate until ready to use. When you're ready, uncover it and let it come to room temperature while the oven preheats. Form that log shape on a prepared pan and top it with the sauce right before baking. Freeze this meatloaf recipe. You can also make this meatloaf recipe ahead of time by freezing after baking. With this method, your meatloaf can last up to 4 months in the freezer.
Now I'm going to show you guys how to make mashed potatoes for the meatloaf. Alright, before we get to the actual recipe, let's talk about mashed potato technique for just a sec. Here are a few essential tips to always keep in mind. Use a blend of potatoes. Some people have a strong preference for starchy russet potatoes or waxy, buttery Yukon Golds. But I highly recommend using a 50/50 mixture of both. It's actually a tip I picked up from the New York Times years ago, and I'm convinced that the mixture gives you the best of both worlds. Cut your potatoes before boiling. I know, so many of us grew up boiling whole potatoes. But the problem is that large, whole potatoes cook unevenly. So instead, cut your potatoes into evenly sized smaller pieces for quick and even boiling. Don't overboil. Or maybe the tip should be, don't multitask too much near the end of the potatoes' cooking time. You want to keep a close eye on them. And as soon as a dinner knife can be inserted easily into a potato with minimal resistance, they're ready to go. Pan dry after cooking. Then, one more step. Immediately after the potatoes have been drained, return them to the hot stock pot, and place it back on the hot burner over low heat. Hold the stock pot handles with oven mitts, and gently shake the pan for about 1 minute to release some of the steam and moisture from the potatoes. Then remove the pan from the heat and set it aside, and your potatoes will be ready to mash. Don't overmix. In general, you want to stir the liquids into your mashed potatoes until they are just combined. Otherwise, if you overmix, they can cross over into gummy territory, which is no good. Season with salt along the way. We will use fine sea salt to season the potatoes both 1. In the water while they are boiling and 2. Afterwards, when adding in the butter, milk and cream cheese. As always when seasoning a recipe, taste along the way while you are preparing the recipe, and add more salt as needed. Mashed potato ingredients: potatoes, garlic, butter, milk, cream cheese, fine sea salt. Toppings, optional. To make mashed potatoes, simply cut the potatoes. Again, feel free to peel your potatoes or leave the skins on. I always leave them on for the extra nutrients and flavor. Then cut your potatoes into evenly sized chunks, about 1 inch or so thick. Then transfer them to a large stock pot full of cold water until all of the potatoes are cut and ready to go. Pro tip: if you are prepping ingredients for a big meal ahead of time, the potatoes can chill in the cold water for up to 4 hours before boiling. Just add a few ice cubes to the water to be sure that it stays cold. Boil the potatoes. Once all of your potatoes are cut, be sure that there is enough cold water in the pan so that the water line sits about 1 inch above the potatoes. Add the garlic and 1 tablespoon salt to the water. Then turn on high heat until the water comes to a boil. and boil the potatoes for about 10-12 minutes until a knife inserted in the middle of a potato goes in with almost no resistance. Carefully drain out all of the water. Prepare your melted butter mixture. Meanwhile, as the potatoes are boiling, heat your butter, milk and an additional 2 teaspoons of sea salt together either in a small saucepan or in the microwave until the butter is just melted. You want to avoid boiling the milk. Set aside until ready to use. Pan dry the potatoes. Return the potatoes to the hot stock pot, and then place the stock pot back on the hot burner, turning the heat down to low. Using 2 oven mitts, carefully hold the handles on the stock pot and shake it gently on the burner for about 1 minute to help cook off some of the remaining steam within the potatoes. Then remove the stock pot entirely from the heat. Mash the potatoes. Using your preferred kind of masher, see above, mash the potatoes to your desired consistency. Stir everything together. Then pour half of the melted butter mixture over the potatoes, and fold it in with a wooden spoon or spatula until potatoes have soaked up the liquid. Repeat with the remaining butter, and then again with the cream cheese. Fold each addition in until just combined to avoid overmixing, or else you will end up with gummy potatoes. Taste and season. One final time, adding in extra salt, plus black pepper, if you would like, to taste. Serve warm. Then serve warm, garnished with any extra toppings that you might like, and enjoy. If you want more delicious recipes like this, hit that subscribe button.